Video. I said again. Oof, violation. You know, the trolls will impose the penalty. Anyway, Stefan Molyneux video. Yay. So yeah, somebody gave me the link and said, you know, it's an actual video on a subject, not just psychobabble, I suppose. But you know, everything he says is kind of psychobabbly, so. But anyway, so the general subject, when communism inspired Americans. So he's doing a New York Times article, I guess, apparently. And but you know, the theme is the same old theme, and apparently it has something to do with this. You know, why isn't communism as hated as Nazism? Obvious reasons. One has a good ambition, work is good, and the other has, you know, Jews inferior should be annihilated in a disgustingly horrid manner. One is based on a theory of bigotry, annihilate the inferiors, and one is, you know, let's value the workers, let's value productivity, the sickle and the hammer, the working tools. So, I mean, it's kind of obvious, the distinctions in terms of the motivations or the themes or principles behind it seem kind of obviously profoundly different. And it seems almost an insipidly stupid argument to say, why aren't communists hated like Nazis? It seems a desperate comparison anyway. But they're desperate because they don't have anything called a rational argument defending 1% of the people owning 80% of the value. Essentially monarchy. They're defenders of monarchy, a privileged class that inherits it. Doesn't earn it, inherits it. Because that's the reality. So that's capitalism as the reality as implemented. Now, if you want to argue capitalism from everybody has the same start and we have a race to wealth, well, that's a different form of capitalism. That hasn't existed. So that real capitalism, where it's actually earned, hasn't been tried. Just as the real socialism that doesn't involve a bunch of other control freaky nonsense hasn't been tried. But they're going to keep pretending the experiments have been done. Let's also state that what hasn't been also explained or what isn't stated is that the capitalism of the last 50 years, that is the capitalism that's made the rich richer, faster and more rich than at any time in human history, more rich than kings actually, the 1%, by percentage of the ownership or possession, is all based on debt. It's all based on, you know, a huge mortgage that'll never be paid, and that somehow that debt will have to be resolved, or there'll never be something called interest rates or anything called rewarding savings. Savings won't be rewarded again, ever, until that debt is fixed. That's a big problem you ain't addressing, that you won't address.
Always struck me as kind of ironic that May Day, International May Day, May 1st, right, this year, 2017, May Day, if you squish the two words together, is also a panic code for a massive disaster about to engulf a group of people, as in, Mayday, Mayday, we're going down! Not, I think, entirely.
Yeah, I don't know. You know, it never struck me as ironic, and I don't think it struck you as ironic. You heard somebody else bring it up, and you said, gee, that's ironic. But it's not really that interesting. The word silver, you know, silver lining, you know, there's probably all kinds of words for that. There's kind of, you know, play word games all day.
Accidental. So we're going to get into a New York Times article about communism in just a moment, but let's do a little bit of background on it first. It is a great mystery to anybody who's studied.
I would have liked to speed this up, but I'm not provided with that option on his video for some reason. I do know.
History with an even remotely objective eyeball. How National Socialism, Nazism, which is...
Right, now obviously Nazism, I don't think anybody calls it Nazism. It wasn't about making knots. It's a Z in there, you know. Nazism. is to call it socialist is kind of misnomery or insane even, because there really wasn't anything socialist about it.
A oppositional doctrine to the spread of communism. National Socialism is treated with such viciousness and contempt, whereas
yes, because it was insanely racist. I mean, not just a little bit racist, but insanely racist. And you can't, that distinction shouldn't mean anything to people. It shouldn't be the glaring thing. Like, let's take the racism out of Nazi. Okay, so let's just take the gratuitous murder. That was a part of it. And then you just have Nazis are saying, let's have efficiency. Let's make lots of Volkswagens and stuff. I don't think people would have much of a negative opinion of Germany then. I mean, not nearly as negative, but they'd say, okay, well, they cleaned up that stupid Europe, which is a sloppy mess, bed bugs and stuff. So, yeah, they cleaned up that stuff with their efficiency. That wouldn't actually be as horrific. But, yeah, the murder part is not a good thing. The racial murder, the hate crimes. Now, you can say the commies committed hate crimes, but, hating the rich, is it more justified than hating people based on race? Hating people who have ideological will to overthrow your government? That shouldn't be something a country looks out for? If they have an economic theory and there's a bunch of people who don't agree with that economic theory, who think they're entitled and want their family possessions back, their entitlement ownership back. You people really aren't fair to any kind of subject, are you? You just don't want to have like some sort of thoughtful conversation about what civilization should look like, do you? You really don't, right? You just want your entitlement, or you want your right to subsidize your children into a better life because somehow they've earned it by being your children. But you really don't think any further than that? Any bigger picture idea doesn't occur to you?
Communism is still elevated in many circles. You can wear, as I saw people in my college, you can wear a badge of Karl Marx. You can't wear...
Yeah, Karl Marx didn't advocate killing the darkies. I mean, please, it's just retarded. Karl Marx, the guy who said, who kind of pointed out that it's a race to the bottom, capitalism. And he pointed out things about how monarchies will ruin it, and inheritance will ruin it, and how maybe even he explained interest rates. I'm not sure about that one, but obviously we're living that reality.
Badge of Adolf Hitler. You can speak positively of socialism and communism in particular, and you will be received as often a benevolent.
Yes, well, I'd say anybody who understands that people really shouldn't have to rent their life, and that if we do have to rent a life because we can't afford a life yet, that we should rent it from a benevolent person. Now, the whole reason why the Nazis went all loop-de-doo against the Jews was because the Jews were bankers, and the bankers had screwed Germany after World War I with this insane debt they had to pay, these reparations. And, the Germans suffered horribly at the hands of the bankers. So that might be ironic in this conversation, where you're defending, you're essentially defending the reactionary system to capitalists destroying the quality of people's lives to maintain their ownership. Ironic.
If perhaps misguided person, whereas of course if you speak positively of National Socialism or Nazism, well, yeah, you are about the worst person on the planet.
Well, yeah, all you have to do is read the propaganda for the Nazis and you understand you have to be the worst person on earth or on the planet to be a member of the club who thinks hating people for these silly reasons like homosexuality, atheism, Jew, or throwing anything else. You're just disabled. You're retired and a little bit feeble.
planet. Which tells you, of course, who won the culture wars. When classical liberalism, when true small...
Well, I wish those culture wars would have had a winner somewhere. Clearly the winner has been some sort of, just like in all these systems, the corrupt have won. Corruption won. Nothing ideological won. Just liars and cheaters and thieves. Personally interested thieves won. Whether they're, whatever banner, whatever suit they're wearing, whatever uniform, it's the same fucking son of a bitch.
All markets, free markets, small governments, and property rights, when that all collapsed in the...
Entitlement rights. So you also have to say it's not just property rights, it's legacy rights. The rights of families to gain an empire and to maintain it through prodigy. And they have a right to it. They earned it. No.
19th century, largely as a result.
I mean, only a racist really could say, I don't want my kids to live on planet Earth as Earthlings. I want them to live as privileged class. I want them to cheat in this most important sport there is, the sport that measures your value as a human being, your ability to do work in the in the civilization, your power. And we should give it to people. They should inherit it. They shouldn't have to earn it. So just understand what you're defending. An unearned civilization. A civilization run by people who didn't earn it.
Of governments taking over the educational systems throughout the Western world, which occurred in sort of mid to late 19th century.
Right, and the educational system that when I went to school forced you to do a Pledge of Allegiance and announce your devotion to God and all kinds of other crap. So yes, the screaming liberals were running the educational system. The educational system that never explained to me in high school, the liberals, never informed me that it was the whole Revolutionary War in America was really about money. It was really about the American settlers saying, we want to own it. We want to take it. We want to take possession. Because, the tea that was in the harbor wasn't taxed tea. It wasn't more expensive tea. The English weren't stealing our money. The English were providing cheaper tea than the Americans could import. They were doing it more efficiently. And we didn't like that because it was them.
Socialize education, you socialize society. It's a generation or two or three, but it is inevitable. You can't fight against any kind of socialism.
Yes, any kind of socialism. I mean, it's just a silly word. I mean, of course we should have some socialism. Having private everything would be idiotic. Having all the cable companies put up cables would be idiotic. In the old days with telephone companies, it'd be stupid to have independent lines on all the poles and all that kind of stuff. Some infrastructure has to be infrastructure. You can't, having a competitive water companies with all their own independent water lines. Anybody who thinks for just a minute can figure out how that wouldn't be efficient. It would be insanely. Having independent gas companies, have them all put in gas pipes. Anybody, like I said, a tiny bit of brains can figure out you have to socialize the infrastructure of anything that's going to be called a civilization. It'll just be insane not to. Having 17 bridges independently owned across a river would be retarded.
With any kind of consistency, if you're willing to surrender the tender minds of entrapped and enslaved young minds to...
Yeah, so more bullshit. So yes, they enslave minds, you liberate minds. Yeah, bullshit. It's all about presenting the truth, the evidence, and doing it honestly. Now you think you're an honestly represent socialism by saying it's all Stalin or it's all Lenin, it's all Gulag, and nothing else is included in that picture, like Sputnik. Yeah.
You socialized or communist sort of environments in government schools, you can't then fight against it in society as a whole. Communism.
Yes, in communism, let's understand that when the Soviet Union broke up, it was the most educated, the most engineers per capita of any country on earth. Very positive things. And yes, I would say at unnecessary negative prices. So you keep the baby and you get rid of the bathwater. So I would argue that capitalism has incentives, which is good, but the bathwater is this stupid notion of entitlement and legacy. So get rid of the unearned part. Get rid of inheritance, and you've taken, 95 at least % of the waste out of capitalism. You've actually made it something efficient. But with legacy ownership, you've made it into tyranny.
It's really, really bad. Socialism is really, really bad, kids. Well, why are we in a socialist environment when it comes to our education?
Well, because again, it's efficiency. Having a bunch of little things do it badly, kind of thing. You try to do things on some scale, mass production, all of that kind of stuff, huge efficiencies and all of that. Now, you're arguing that it's all this liberal agenda. I would argue that I didn't see any of that in this school I went to. It was very pro-business, pro-capitalism. There wasn't any banners being waved for let's have a revolution, let's free ourselves from the 1%. There was no such rhetoric. So this whole lie that the screaming liberals are running the education system is bullshit.
Because see, you can't really get anywhere. Once you socialize the minds of children, the socialization of society becomes inevitable, at least until the internet. So
no, before the internet, people knew there were people on welfare who were taking advantage of the system. Before the internet, people knew there were rich people like Donald Trump who inherit it and then claim they're brilliant. People knew there was bullshit in the world. And, you just don't provide any mechanism. Your type don't provide any mechanism to fix it because you're all or nothing. You're dogmatic religious kooks, and you're saying you're either my kind of Catholic or you're not a respectable religion.
It's a great mystery. How is communism still a thing? How is it not viewed as something, an environmental mind toxin even more virulent than National Socialism or Nazism?
I mean, anybody who understands what it is to be a renter and to pay fees to some guy who just inherited ownership, didn't earn it, didn't beat him in a fair fight. Anybody who's worked a regular job, okay, for a crappy salary, I think, should have some clue, that the people running the thing didn't earn the running privilege.
How is it not viewed as the greatest intellectual toxic tragedy to fall upon our species?
Yes, and more bullshit rhetoric. And again, and the capitalists have us in preposterous debt because that ran their engine. They're making money on the debt. That's what the bankers do. They make money on debt. That's what the legacy owners do. They rent cash. They rent it. That's what interest rates are. Rent.
Only worse. Its death count is only beaten by statism as a whole, right? So statism, the idea that...
Yeah, the idea that you construct a civilization. That civilization doesn't just happen because human beings are wonderful creatures and they take care of each other and they don't cheat. Obviously, the whole history of human history demonstrates they constantly cheat. They are selfish, creepy little bugs. And they have to have a system that obliges them to play a fair game. If you didn't have umpires at the baseball game, the players would all be shoving, they'd all be taking coke, and they'd all be shoving cork in their bats, and they'd all be putting big nails in their shoes, and they'd be doing all kinds of shit to fuck the rules, to fuck a good game. Because humans by nature are just, they're too gluttonous, and they'll compromise, they'll rationalize. They'll make excuses for, oh, fuck the Jews, bastards. They'll do shit like that. I don't like black people. Let's kill them.
Societies must always be centralized around a coercive monopoly, right, called the state. Well, statism just in the 20th century caused the death.
And again, all the good sport you know of has a coercive set of rules. So there's no good game played anywhere in the world of entertainment. No good game that doesn't have strict rules enforced draconianly. You have some example of a sport where they don't have rules, strict rules imposed draconianly? Can you give me an example of that sport? Where somebody watches it, somebody thinks it's a good game? No, you don't have an example. Because it's a ludicrous proposition. If you want to have something that works, you've got to engineer it. You've got to pay for it. Working is expensive. It's not cheap. Good, quality. You have to takes energy. And you want a system running on nothing except human greed. Right, because you think you're going to be the white privileged. I'm going to be a part of the white privilege. So therefore, that's my game. What thought have you given the subject? How can you possibly think it's best for the whole human race to be the serfs to the owners? How can you envision monarchy as the right answer?
At the 250 million people. Governments murdered their own civilians, murdered their own people. 250 million.
This own people thing again. You know, it always comes up. Their own people. Yes, their own people who are completely hostile to the rules of the game. Completely hostile to everything the civilization stands for. I don't think that's rationally described as your own people. People who want to destroy your country, destroy the mechanism, destroy the democracy, destroy as your own people. I don't think so.
People, 250 million people. That's not including wars, right? This is just direct slaughtering of your own people. A lot of that had to do with communism, with its 100 million plus dead.
Yes, and you think that's an honest number, but whatever. I mean, it's it's almost a laughably insane number, considering that what the population of Russia was in, say, 1910. It's an insane, made-up pile of crap.
Nobody gets to be positive about the Spanish Inquisition, right? The Inquisition, and the Inquisition killed, between 3,000 to 10,000 people directly. You could argue maybe 100,000 more died.
Yeah, well, it went after the leaders, obviously, the rebel leaders. It didn't worry about the peasant thinkers, because no one could read and write back then anyway. So it got rid of the people that could read and write. Atheism.
In prisons as a result of being in prison for things. Not directly killed, but killed indirectly.
Again, and you could argue, though, that the entire Crusades and the entire what the Spanish did in South America could be included as the Inquisition. I mean, when you show up with a book and literally do this, you show up riding your horses, you hold a book in the air and say, "Do you believe in this book, the Bible?" And they say, "Well, no." What's a book? And then you kill them, you slaughter them. Fuck you.
So, you could sort of say maybe 100,000. Well, even if we take the lower estimates of how many people communism killed, communism was 1,000 times worse than the Spanish Inquisition. And if you speak positively about the Spanish Inquisition, well, you're not considered to be a very...
Again, let's understand, Russia didn't have America's population density, so this whole idea that you could actually do this 100 million thing is just idiotic.
Pleasant person, but you can still be very positive about communism, and you can have very sympathetic hymns to communism published in the New York Times, and this tells you all you need to know. The question is, how is it a thing? To me, it's not that complicated, because...
Well, to me, it's incredibly complicated in that none of these words have strict definition. Again, capitalism with inheritance, capitalism without inheritance are two fundamentally different economic theories. Fundamentally, because all the monarchies, all the monopolies end. if you don't have legacy. So even if somebody becomes a monopoly in a business, it dies with the owner, so to speak, quote unquote, and the game is on again. So, and all the prices stay low because everything goes back on the market. So all the paintings aren't held in any reservoir somewhere, taken off the market to make the ones that are left preposterously expensive. It's the difference between having 10,000 Van Goghs and having, 58 in existence, or whatever the number is, 110, whatever. Huge difference in terms of the economy and in terms of who can purchase industry. And it's an entirely different ballgame.
Nothing to do with ideology.
Well, whatever. It's all ideology. And again, it's the definition of words. And you want to do this pigeonhole thing. And the pigeonholes are stupid. Communism, in the sense of a bunch of laws against rock and roll and all the other stuff they were controlling. It wasn't just the economy they were controlling everything. And let's understand that there was no principled theme. It didn't have anything to do with Marxism. It had to do with a partyism. Okay, so it was basically just a union out of control. The members of the one union seized control of the economy, and their corruption there was no system to fix it. There was no way to stop the corruption of the party. They didn't put a mechanism in place to take the party out of power.
We are not designed to be rational. We are not designed to be empirical.
Silly comments. Where obviously our brain is designed to analyze every circumstance that confronts us. Just like a Tyrannosaurus would analyze, how deep is the water I have to go through to get to that food over there. They analyze the risk equations. That's what our brain is able to do. And the sense of me saying, let me invest in monarchy, let me invest in inheritance legacy, let me invest in an economy not based on earning it, based on having it given to you, privilege, birthright, based on birthright. We don't allow birthright to be a single element of sport. Nobody gets a gold medal because their father got one. They have to earn it.
We are designed to reproduce. And communism can help less able people reproduce.
So now he's going to get into this genetic argument again. So he really is some kind of Nazi. Obviously, the whole thing of civilization will create a certain advantage to decadence. You'll have health care, you'll have different things, so you won't die of syphilis, and you won't do this, and you won't do that. So you can have lots of mechanisms that protect you against negative, essentially, behaviors. And clearly, the reckless poor are a huge liability. If you don't put some controls on them. And whether you have capitalism or socialism, that liability is the same liability. So I don't think there's any distinction, especially when the capitalism feeds on creating new consumers, new people to be in debt, new people to pay rent. Landlords need renters.
All animals are bad, right? Eating and screwing. That's what we do. And so communism shifts resources from the most able to the least able through the agency of ideology.
No, so again, he says you're able if you inherit it. So Trump was already enabled when he was rewarded. He was somehow proved himself to be worth $1 billion. He inherited a huge amount of capital, the father's fortune essentially, and he didn't do anything with it. So let's not even talk about how big a failure he is. If you don't pay federal taxes for 20 years, it's because you're not making money, not because you are making money. So clearly he couldn't be a multi-billionaire because he never paid back the money he lost. He never earned back the money he lost. Fact one. But I could go through all the legacy ownership that's in the world right now. The top 1% don't earn it. They inherit it. The top 5% don't earn it. They inherit it. And they also inherit, through that process, they gain legacy positions of importance. CEOs don't come from the ghetto. They come from a privileged class of connected people.
Ideology is a form of pickpocketing of a rich person to give resources to a less rich person.
So again, no, and capitalism is take the money from the poor and give it to the legacy owners. Rent the poor a life and make a profit off their struggle. More money, more money, more money.
And as a very powerful reproductive strategy for betas and failures and losers and manipulators and so on.
Yeah, well, again, if you think even under capitalism you could have a social state where you just allowed people to die, yeah, that's very, you're not much of a Dickens reader, I guess, but I would argue that that wouldn't be sustainable just in and of itself, because human beings, once they get a little bit of intelligence, can realize that there for the grace of God go I. Disability could happen to me. I could have an accident and lose my leg. I could be paralyzed. There could be a lot of things. And being born in the ghetto is not a good thing. But let's understand why there's no prohibition against poor people reproducing. That's a religious problem, because people think it's an entitlement to have children. That's sort of stuck with the Republican Capitalist Party. That's the one that's passed all the laws against the right to die and the internal right of people to have as many kids as they want, whether they can afford it or not. Or the right to even torment their children by not having enough money, or molest their children. So you're on such a, again, might as well defend Nazism if you're going to defend child abusers and their right to abuse children, their right to have them to be slaves, or sell them, or overtly molest them.
It's enormously powerful and enormously popular. There are genes for intelligence and there are genes for non-intelligence. And
well, let's understand that the genetic difference in intelligence is so small by percentage, it doesn't have anything to do with real functionality or real productivity. The tiny 5% difference, if I take away 5% or 10% of my IQ, I'm not going to be completely dysfunctional. So it's not like this isn't like something like white people are smart and all the other darkies are retarded. It's just a lie. And it's silly to even indicate it. And it's silly to even have a conversation about it, because the change in the intelligence quotient doesn't necessarily have anything also to do with the character quotient. Because being smarter sometimes just makes you more of a scheming son of a bitch. So if your motives suck and you're smart, you're just a more dangerous criminal.
They're at war.
Which I would say you are. You're a smart fellow, but your motivations are disgustingly stupid.
In a free market, genes for intelligence are favored because children cost money, and therefore the more intelligent you are, the more money you are likely to make. And
again, so this isn't how wealth is held in capitalism. Wealth is held in capitalism by being inherited. There's still Rothschild fortunes made back in Napoleon's day that is still out there. The Kennedy money, all the Rockefeller money, all this big money is still out there. It's just not called Rockefeller anymore because the names change. But the entitlement remains the same. The ownership remains the same. The legacy remains the same. And that's where most of the money held in the stock market is held by people who didn't earn it. The FODs, or somebody, they inherit it. It's a disgusting, invidious, insidious, and awful civilization killer. Monarchy. And that's all it is. Birthright is monarchy, and it's bad news.
Therefore, the more children you can have. Right? One of the great disasters in Western history.
Well, again, but you wouldn't. So this idiotic notion that people who have gained a life where they want to be productive and are interested in engineering something or creating something or running something somehow also want to have a bunch of children. No. All the great scientists, most of them didn't have a bunch of kids. There's exceptions. Edison had 8 or something. but he was kind of in a different class of running of things. But obviously the price paid for that is that they also are very unattentive parents. So if the wife dies, the whole thing's a mess. That kind of nonsense. But there's still clearly a relationship between people who intend to be productive and any notion of being a responsible parent. So if you don't mind being an irresponsible parent, yes, it'll work that way. You can have kids with a bunch of whores. But if you have any kind of sense of responsibility to your children and to their upbringing, how many we can go down the list of the richest people in the world and look at their spawn. Just look at the empire, the British Empire. Look at the genetic code there of the kings. It ain't too swift.
It was the Catholic Church locking up the most intelligent in the largely monastic celibacy of the priesthood and the monastery. The most intelligent men and women would be locked away and not reproduce, and it took something as gruesome as the Black Death to wipe out the less intelligent and give scope for the more intelligent, which began to lay the foundation.
So again, the less intelligence you always associate with poverty. So it really doesn't have anything to do with intelligence. It just has to do with the fact that if you're born a renter in those times, you're not going to change it. You're not going to become part of them. If you don't have the genetic card at the door, they're going to look for your pedigree. And if you don't have the pedigree, you're not in the game. And that's the truth. And so your capitalism had a huge system of just annihilating anything that would be intelligent among the peasants. The intelligent peasant was more likely just to be killed as a rebel.
For the modern world. So smart genes and dumb genes are at war with each other. In a free market environment,
so again, so he's talking like somebody in 2017 should be having a conversation about how we need to have genetically superior human beings, because that's what's really wrong. You see, it's communism or some idea of fairness or having a good game. All of that ideology is coming from some sort of genetic stupidity, and we'll be fine. If we just get rid of these commoners and their bad genes. It's just silly.
Smart genes get the most resources, have the most children, and
so again, he would say that people who are successful would automatically have some reason to have more children, when we know people have children because they don't take control of their lives and they live their life sloppily. The person with the ordered life and the person who takes responsibility for their life isn't going to have 12 kids. They'd understand there's no way I can possibly raise 12 kids properly. I can't pay enough attention to them.
The less intelligent genes have fewer children, and what happens then is the genetic intelligence of the species tends to go ahead. This has nothing to do with eugenics. This is just freedom.
No, it's just stupid. It's stupid to think it matters in the first place, because we don't need... What are you going to do with the extra intelligence but fret, generally speaking? there's and it's to your advantage, I suppose, because I think it's clear that if you went by IQ, Republicans lose the election. The capitalists lose the election if you go by IQ and voting records.
Instead, this has nothing to do with controlling anyone's reproduction. It's just that in a free market environment, the smartest people have the most children. And so
again, idiotic notion altogether. It's always it has a huge amount to do with intent and control once you're smart enough to wear a condom. So you want to say that smart people don't have as many accidents, of course. So how does this make any logical sense, what you're arguing? Smart people don't do what dumb people do, and dumb people have too many children, and they're going to continue to do that. So that liability always existed. With any kind of success in any species, that's the liability you have.
Free market is viewed as a predator by less intelligent genetics, right? I mean...
It's exactly the opposite, okay? the dumbest people on earth are the ones who admire the king. It's the stupid people in Britain who think, well, let's keep the monarchy. Oh, let's not put the old queenie out of her castle. The idiots preserve the nonsense, not the smart people. Marx was a very smart man. Idiot.
Because it benefits the rich. Now, of course, in the long run, even the less intelligent genes end up doing very well. The free market since the 19th century in the West, and it's not even been a remotely totally free market, become less so over time.
Yeah, that's right. See, it was a free market and then it crashed because that's where your freedom ends up. And now it got to the 50s where it had a pretty good system going where the rich weren't getting richer but the middle class were getting richer. So the workers were getting wealthy, not the rich. And then we decided with Reagan to change all that, and now we've bought prosperity on a credit card, and we're pretending it never has to be paid back, that there'll never be a due date on all that bullshit. So we have a completely fake economy borrowed on laborers who will not pay it back. The future, we're not making people who have any value, and those people will never have an income capable of paying back all the money owed.
There's been a 40 times increase in the standard of living across the board. 40.
Yeah, and there's been you could say, an infinite increase in the deficit, in the sense that it was almost nothing, and now it's so big that interest rates can't go up at all, ever again, or it will be unfinanceable. It's so big now. You could never, if you ended up having a 5 or 7 or 10% interest rate because of some inflation, the whole thing collapses because all your revenue would have to go to financing your debt, paying the rent. You have no money left over for anything else.
The times increase, completely unprecedented in human history. But in the short run...
Right, the richer have gotten richer. The 1% has gotten richer than any other point in history, more faster and more wealthy than any point in history. Wealthier than all the kings and all the king's horses and all that crap. I mean, just more wealthy than the British lords of the past.
Our genes don't care about the standard of living 100 years from now. Our genes care about how many times can I replicate at the moment.
It's just a silly thing to even, like I said, it's a moronic discussion for a modern human being to talk about what your genes want, or some idiotic notion that we already don't know how the biology works and pregnancy is quite preventable and all that stuff. So it's just a silly, childish understanding of the physical nature of reality. You're just not getting anything correct if you think we're a genetic organism. We're a philosophical organism now. Memes, ideas are what run us. If you have any, and he's talking about intelligence, right? If you have any intelligence at all, ideas run you.
And I did a video recently called "This is Important!" exclamation mark. I don't often use the exclamation marks, but in this case I did.
Oh, right. Your whole manner of speech is one big exclamation point. Tuh. It's all this animated hysteria. Yes, you're just a quieter Alex Jones. Panic, people, panic. But I'll get you to panic with my subtlety. The enemy's over there. They're coming for you. They're coming to put you in the gulag for some notion of fairness and earning.
About the Pareto distribution, which is that the square root of a productive group in a free market, the square root of that group produce half the wealth. In a company of 10,000 people, it's 100 people who produce half the wealth, so they get a...
Yeah, whatever. Again, they own it, so what I don't even know what his nonsense math is, but we know where the value is, and the value is in the labor, okay? And unfortunately, though, that is changing. You know, the guy sweeping the floor doesn't have much value anymore because a machine can replace him. So, you know, there's still value in engineers to some extent, but again, all of it's diminishing. We're getting to the point where the rich don't need us, and they can just create two soda machines. You know, one that buys Coke and one that sells Coke, and they can just charge on all the transactions, and that will be fine to them as long as they get their rent. They can just rent. Every time a quarter goes in, they get 3%. You know, every time a soda comes out, they get 3%. That's all they need. They just need somebody else's industry to feed on, and that's what you're defending. And it's disgusting from a human being. You're supposed to be one of us, and you're basically defending a system that would turn us into nothing but a soda machine.
A lot more resources, so they can, again, according to evolution, they can have a lot more.
Again, evolution is over. Okay, there is no evolution. And there shouldn't be any evolution, because evolution just makes monsters. It just makes tyrannosauruses. So there's really no argument, in my opinion. Evolution makes monarchies. It makes things that kill all the competition and exploit the fuck out of some food source.
Children. So the free market is viewed as a predator by less intelligent genes, and so...
Well, again, I would say exactly the opposite is the truth. The educated are the ones who understand that it is a predator, and the predator is made out of... Well, they don't understand the legacy part well enough. They actually do think that some of these rich people actually earn it. You know, silly assholes.
As able people, what they want to do is they want to invent an ideology that triggers the empathy of the more intelligent, and IQ is associated with empathy, so more intelligent people are more susceptible to being manipulated on the grounds of...
So it's two separate, so he just contradicted his own argument, right? The dumb people are the ones that are falling for the bad idea because they wouldn't have the empathy. Now he's saying the smart people are the ones that have the empathy, yet you're demonstrating that the smart people don't have the empathy in the sense that your definition of a smart person, clearly the Republicans don't have much of this empathy thing. They don't, they do think they're entitled to their privileges. They're cheats. Their mortgage deductions, their other bullshit. They should have a easier time. Again, it's just cheating. They should have a cheat in the contest for the gold medal. They should be able to cheat. That's all you're defending is cheaters. You don't want a fair fight.
Empathy. And so the less competent gene sets, instead of trying to compete in the free market, which they can't do, relative to the more able and more competent.
Again, so this argument that somehow Donald Trump proved he was a better competitor in the market than I was, let's say. I'm just disgustingly poor, but mostly because of a psychological disability. But regardless, let's say I'm moderately skilled, so I definitely could make a moderately good income if I was able. But Donald Trump proved he was better than me when he was 17 years old or 18 years old and got millions of dollars in New York real estate. He proved he was better. He was proved he was more competent or more capable of doing something with that investment capital. And what he did with it was lose it and pretend he's a billionaire when he's not.
More intelligent. What they do is they invent ideologies that provoke the sympathies, the pathological altruism of the more intelligent into transferring resources.
So again, this isn't so much about transferring resources. I'm not a big fan of paying people to have babies on welfare. I'm a big supporter of the idea that you have one kid recklessly, that's all you get. One strike and you're done. So if you want welfare, then you get sterilized because it's totally unproductive. I don't have any problem with saying to poor people, you're totally unproductive. You cost $10,000 a year in healthcare costs, and you're producing children that you don't know how to raise, and they're not going to be productive citizens by statistical fact. Okay, very few of them are going to do any better than you're doing, and so yes, you're a huge liability. I'm not opposed to that spade being called a spade, but that's not what you're arguing. You're defending a system of entitlement. Okay, you're not defending a competitive fair race. And you're not defending even some moderate system of, well, yeah, you do have to do something about the fact that people's legs get cut off and all that kind of crap. So you're confusing, okay, people's rational empathy with systems where, yeah, well, what are you going to do? Taking children away from parents is ugly as fuck. Okay, it just doesn't look good. Nobody wants to do it. Nobody wants to pull the crying baby from the crying woman's arms and say, you're not competent. So because we don't have the guts to do that, and then you're claiming that it's the liberals that don't have the... I don't think the righties have the guts to do it either.
Now, this very quickly doesn't work, which is why charity is always limited. But if you can get it enshrined in state power, right? In other words, if you can have the state control resources and shift them from the more able to the less able, then the less able are able to have more children.
So again, he's just arguing against the welfare state. So he's not arguing against other kinds, most of the socialism that exists, which has to do with healthcare and other infrastructures. He's just talking about the welfare state, and that's clearly easily fixed by just saying, okay, let's de-incentivize having children, and people will have to, even if we have to create some first-rate orphanages in the short run, just to give people a sense that this is a huge responsibility having children, and we're not going to pay you to have kids. That's stupid. We don't want people to have children they can't raise well. Now, if you guaranteed us you were going to raise them into really good human beings, then it might be worth subsidizing you. It might be worth paying people to have children if they meant to take it seriously. But we know that most of the reckless poor didn't do that. They didn't get pregnant on purpose. They didn't get, beyond the fact that they said this might be a meal ticket. And they have no capacity. They don't have the skills to play that piano. They have no understanding of what it takes to grow a human being into somebody who's productive and has character.
And the more able end up having fewer children, and that's great for the gene set called less able, less intelligent, less capable, and so on, which wants to survive.
Again, I don't even know why you're turning this into a genetic conversation. It's really disgustingly... I mean, you shouldn't even get away with it just because it's dangerous to even play this kind of game. But it really doesn't have anything to do with the subject, unless you're some sort of racist. It just doesn't have anything to do with the subject. I mean, clearly, anybody can be educated well or educated poorly. And, they can be maturated well or maturated poorly. So you don't address the problem based on genetics. It's not genetics that is creating the problem. It's environments that are creating the problem. I mean, if you really think it's the genetics of people that create ghettos, then I think you're really, really, really stupid.
Life just as much as any other organism does. So that's why it's still a thing, is that there are still people who cannot compete in the free market, who can't gain the same amount of resources in the free market as the more intelligent and more able.
Right. They can't they don't go to private schools, they don't get private tutors, they don't get other advantages. So let's say there's been lots of dysfunction in the rich and the celebrity spawn, right? They have lots of dysfunctions, lots of drug problems, lots of that kind of stuff. And they spend a huge amount of resources, trying to bail themselves out of the trouble. And we just know that the poor don't have those resources to bail themselves out of the trouble they step into in terms of the psychoses and the problems they get. So it's just this huge double standard of saying, well, why don't you just walk up to the poor people and say, why didn't you inherit the ability to take care of these problems? Why didn't you inherit the money? Because that's how we fix it. We just spend the money, to go to some fancy resort to get some drug treatment. Why don't you do that, poor person? Why don't you all go to the Betty Ford Clinic? What bullshit.
Can, and they want, their genes demand resources, right? Because gaining the attention and attraction of women is essential in, the sort of free market of mating and reproduction.
Yeah, and what kind of woman, right? A woman with fake face and fake breasts and, genetically nothing like what she's selling. So this is the irony, right? This is the trophy wife. She's genetically a completely different organism. than what she looks like now. Yeah. So that your genetic argument kind of goes down the toilet, because guess what? You're not gonna inherit fake boobs or a fake nose.
Juicy. And so if you're a less able person, if you're less intelligent, if you're less competent, or maybe if you just have personal failings, like you're lazy or distracted.
Yeah, and all of those can be overcome if you have $10 million in the bank. I can have lots of failures. You see, I've made this argument, but it's like playing with a net and not a net, right? So you're doing this trapeze thing 100 feet up in the air, and you're mocking the poor people because they're scared and they don't want to play because there's no net. And then you're sitting there and admiring the rich because they not only have a net, lots of money in the bank. Okay, failure isn't going to be the end of the world. I can play an aggressive game. I can do backflips. I can do lots of tricks because overall, most of the time I'm going to succeed at the trick, and the number of times I'll fail will be small. So the number of times I hit the net and look like a pussy will be small. And there's no margin for error for the poor. They know if they fall, they die. So there is, and you don't understand how this is a completely different psychology. For you to mock the poor because they're apprehensive, afraid, and they don't play, they don't do the tricks, it's laughable under these circumstances, because they can't afford to start a business, not make money right away. The Google, I've pointed out this one, I'll do it just at the end. Those Google cunts, they took a big pile of their money, one of them, and gave it to his wife to create a genetic engineering company. And it's just this whole idea. It's the William Randolph Hearst theory of business. They can create a business and they can lose money for 100 years. They don't have to make a profit for 100 years. How can anybody compete against a company that doesn't need to make a profit, that can lose millions of dollars every year? You don't think I can outcompete you if I can lose money doing what you're doing? If I could lose $1 million a year doing what you're doing, you don't think I could outcompete you? Put you out of business? Sure I can. So he's not going to pay any attention to any real, thoughtful theory behind these economic systems and what really makes them run, what they run on. So this is just so pitiful. That people can do this simplistic. Why do people hate on the Nazis? Aren't they the same as the Workers' Party? The hate people genetically party is the same as the love worker party in terms of principles? Fuck. You people are really, really despicable. Anyway, we're hitting an hour, so I guess that's enough for now. Maybe I'll do more of this, but it seems clear he's never going to get to the New York Times article. And who knows what kind of goo it was about, the Russians are obviously so much better off now. Having the country owned by 12 families, 80% of it, they're so much better off that way. Clearly. Oh, I must hit the button.